The stars stretched like blades of cold fire across the void as Commander Rafe Corrin stared out the viewport of the Argus, his warship crawling silently toward the drifting wreck. The vessel ahead, alien in design, was spinning slowly, bleeding faint pulses of residual energy into the dark. The Zalari hadn't built anything like this before. It was older. Or perhaps forgotten. Scan returns are inconclusive, Lieutenant Marin said, her voice crisp, mechanical. No life signs. No heat. No identifiable language on the hull. Rafe scratched his bearded jaw and leaned in closer. The ship was massive, claw-shaped, its hull scarred by what looked like energy blasts and ancient decay. He'd seen death up close, cities burning in orbit, alien war machines slicing through human defenses. But this, the stillness of it, unnerved him more than any battlefield. "Suit up," he ordered. "I want a 4-man breach team on me in 5. The crew moved without question. Rafe's presence carried weight. 12 years in the Resistance did that. A legacy of surviving hopeless odds and doing things that left ghosts in their wake. The hangar lit up as the shuttle disengaged and dropped into the vacuum. Inside, Rafe checked his weapon and took a deep breath. The armor's exoskeleton hummed as it synced to his nervous system. He didn't like mysteries. And yet here he was, drawn in again. They entered through a torn hatch, floating into a corridor that flickered with blue emergency lights. Panels hung from the ceiling. The walls pulsed faintly, as if the ship itself was asleep, dreaming of another age. "Keep your eyes open," Rafe muttered. Movement caught his eye. Not ahead, within. A memory maybe. A whisper of something left unsaid. He shook it off. "Commander," Marin's voice crackled in his earpiece. "You'll want to see this." Rafe followed her signal into a chamber that didn't match the rest of the ship's skeletal cold. Here, the light was warmer, golden even. In the center was a cryopod, sleek, intact, humming faintly. Inside, a woman floated in perfect stillness. Her skin was porcelain pale, her hair a cascade of soft pink strands that drifted like silk in zero gravity. But it was her ears that struck him, elongated, pointed. Alien. Yeah, not quite. He stepped closer, feeling a twist in his gut he couldn't name. No power source. No connection to the rest of the systems. "This pod shouldn't even be functioning," Marin said. Rafe's voice was low. "Get it back to the Argus." Carefully. As the team maneuvered the pod, he couldn't pull his gaze away. Something about her face. Not recognition exactly, but familiarity. Back on the ship, they sealed the chamber and began preliminary scans. Rafe watched from the other side of the glass. The woman remained motionless, locked in a kind of suspended serenity. "Commander," Dr. Issen said, tapping a holographic readout. "You're not going to like this. Try me." She's not Zalari. Not fully. Her genetic sequence, it's unstable. Mutated, fused, but the dominant structure is human. Rafe frowned. Human-alien hybrid? Possibly. But here's the real kicker. Issen rotated the display, highlighting a genetic marker. "The strand? It's uniquely yours." Rafe's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, mine?" "I ran a triple confirmation. She shares over 65% of your genetic material. She could be your offspring. Or a clone." "That's impossible." Issen gave a grim smile. "Apparently not." Rafe turned away, breath shallow. He'd spent his life cutting down enemies, burying friends, watching humanity lose itself one battle at a time. He didn't have time for fantasies. And certainly not for impossible children. But then, nothing about this war had ever been simple. 2 hours later, the woman stirred. The team watched through the observation window as her eyes fluttered open, luminescent silver. She didn't panic. Her gaze swept the room, and then she looked directly at Rafe through the glass. As if she already knew who he was. Security moved to intercept when she sat up, but she simply raised a hand. The lights dimmed momentarily, then returned to normal. She interfaced with the system, Issen said, with no external tech. Rafe stepped into the chamber alone. Up close, her presence was even more unnerving. Her features were delicate, but too precise, sculpted with intention. Not born, perhaps. Can you understand me? He asked. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. Her voice, when it came, was soft, almost melodic. Yes. I do now. Who are you? She paused. Who was called Illyra. I was created. By who? Her expression didn't change. By those who feared what you would become. Rafe stiffened. What does that mean? Illyra looked away, as if listening to a voice only she could hear. You don't remember. Not yet. But you will. A silence fell. Rafe felt the room press in tighter, the weight of something enormous just beyond comprehension. He didn't like puzzles. He liked facts, orders, targets. And yet, her voice was barely a whisper. They buried the truth inside you. She raised her hand, touching her own chest. Then pointed to his. In here. Security was already moving in, weapons raised, shouting warnings. Illyra stood calm. No threat in her posture, but power in her gaze. Rafe raised a hand. Stand down. The guards hesitated, uncertain. She hasn't done anything, he said. Let her speak. The silence that followed was filled with electricity. Illyra looked at him again, not like a stranger. Not like a threat. But like someone who knew him. Deeply. I was sent here to find you, she said. He met her eyes. Why? To remind you who you are. Behind them, the ship shuddered, an alarm blaring through the hull. Incoming vessel, Marin's voice crackled over comms. Not one of ours. Rafe looked at Illyra. Her face remained calm, almost serene. They're coming to erase me, she said. And you? He turned, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Like hell they are. The past, the war, the ghosts, everything was catching up. But for the first time in years, Rafe didn't feel like a man merely surviving. He felt like a man with something to protect. And that changed everything. The briefing room had been sealed, soundproofed, and scrubbed of all surveillance. Rafe sat across from Illyra under dim lights, the hum of the Argus internal systems barely audible beneath the tension. She studied the room with the quiet observation of someone both unfamiliar and uncannily aware. Her fingers brushed the table surface, not out of curiosity, but calculation. She was measuring everything, dimensions, resonance, proximity. Rafe had seen that kind of behavior before. From enemy recon drones. You say you were created, Rafe began, keeping his tone level. But by who and for what? Illyra turned her gaze to him. You were part of it. I would remember creating something like you. No, you wouldn't. Her voice carried a strange gravity, like a melody undercut with static. The memories were sealed. Part of your agreement. Rafe clenched his jaw. What agreement? Illyra closed her eyes briefly. 26 years ago, you volunteered for a program called Project Prometheus. A classified initiative to create adaptive biological interfaces using hybrid DNA, your DNA, and Zalari biosynthetic encoding. That's not possible. I wasn't even in command that long ago. He stopped. The years before the war were a blur. Too many battlefronts, too much trauma. He remembered enlisting, remembered the fire of revenge when the Zalari burned Mars. But before that, fragments. A hallway. A lab. A name he couldn't quite place. Your genome was ideal, she continued, her voice softening. Stable but flexible. The perfect template. They combined your genetic material with Zalari neural substrate. I was one of the few viable results. Rafe shook his head. You're saying you're... What? My daughter? I was grown. Raised in acceleration chambers. Programmed to observe. But I'm not merely your child, Rafe. I am the mirror of what humanity could become. It hit like a gut punch. Not just the words, but the certainty with which she spoke them. She wasn't trying to convince him. She was revealing what he should have known all along. How did you end up on that ship? There were those who believed in peace, Illyra said, eyes narrowing. Zalari defectors who saw the war as a cycle spiraling toward extinction. One of them took me from the lab and hid me, placed me in stasis after the program was shut down. Why would they shut it down? Because it worked. That silenced the room. Rafe leaned forward, every instinct screaming to doubt, but unable to deny the pull of familiarity in her presence, the cadence of her speech, the echo of something unspoken between them. Outside the sealed room, alarms flickered briefly, then stopped. "They're already trying to erase you," she said, nodding toward the door. "They knew the moment my DNA was confirmed." Rafe stood, pacing. "That means they're still monitoring internal systems. Even in here." Elira tilted her head. "I can disable the sensors." He paused. "How?" "I'm more than what they made me. I learned." Before he could answer, her pupils dilated, and every light in the room blinked out for a breath. When they returned, the air felt still. Rafe checked his comm. "They can't hear us now," she said. A flicker of admiration passed through him. And fear. Dr. Issen called him to the medbay 10 minutes later. The doctor's face was pale, hands trembling slightly as he gestured toward a sealed chamber. "I accessed old records," he whispered, "from before the fall of EarthNet. Hidden files buried under neural encryption. Prometheus was real, Rafe. And you were one of 5 volunteers." Rafe's chest tightened. "Who were the others?" "I don't know. But the files mention one successful subject, Elira 9. Designated seed interface." "That's her." "Seed interface for what?" Issen shook his head. "Something called the Ansible Core. It's buried on Earth's moon. An ancient device, possibly alien tech. The files suggest it can override communication networks galaxy-wide. She's the key. And someone doesn't want her unlocked." The door slammed open. Security officers, led by High Commander Darren, entered with rifles raised. "Commander Corrin, you're relieved of duty pending investigation." Rafe didn't flinch. "On what grounds?" "Breach of protocol. Unauthorized biological recovery. Possible exposure to enemy contagion." "You mean the girl?" Darren's face hardened. "She's not a girl. She's a threat. She's human. She's Zalari-built." Rafe stepped between the soldiers and the med chamber. "You're not taking her. You're not in command anymore." The standoff burned in silence. Elira's voice broke through the comms, despite the dead signal. "You don't have time to argue." Every screen in the room turned to static, then flickered with ancient blue glyphs, Zalari script. Then in English, "They're coming." The Argus shuddered. Emergency klaxons wailed. "Incoming warp signature." Marin's voice screamed across all channels. "Unidentified vessel just exited fold space, right on top of us." Darren hesitated. Rafe didn't. He fired first, disarming the lead officer, then turned and smashed the override on the chamber. "Go!" he yelled to Elira, who had already stepped out, eyes glowing faintly. She touched the wall, and a panel slid open, a maintenance crawl space. "This way." They vanished into the ducts as chaos erupted behind them. The ship lurched as weapons fired, shields flaring against the impact. Somewhere, someone was shouting orders. Rafe didn't look back. They emerged in the lower hangar bay. 2 flight pods sat idle, their engines dormant. Elira moved with eerie grace, accessing the console before Rafe could blink. The bay doors creaked open, revealing the jagged stars cape beyond. "We'll never make it to the moon with fighters," Rafe said. "We need a jump-capable vessel." "There's one," she replied, pointing to a stealth courier in the shadow of the bulkhead. "Prototype. Part of the Prometheus fleet." He stared. "How do you know that?" "I remember." They boarded the ship as explosions rocked the hangar. Rafe jumped into the pilot's chair, letting muscle memory take over. The ship was unlike any he'd flown, responsive, intuitive, almost alive. They punched through the collapsing field, the Argus shrinking behind them like a dying beast. Silence returned as they crossed into fold space, the stars distorting around them. Rafe sat back, adrenaline fading, staring at the strange girl. No, the weapon, beside him. "Why do I trust you?" he asked. Elira's expression didn't change. "Because part of you still remembers." He wanted to deny it, to cling to the solid reality of war, of enemies and orders and casualties. But something in her voice stirred a memory, not a flash, but a feeling. a hand reaching out through glass. A promise made in silence. "What is the Ensemble core?" he asked after a while. "It's truth," she said simply. "Truth powerful enough to end wars." "And what happens when the people in power don't want the truth?" Her eyes met his. "Then we show them what happens when they try to bury it." The ship jolted gently. They had exited fold space. Before them, bathed in the pale light of the sun, hung the moon. Scarred, silent, and ancient. Elira stood, her voice quiet. "We're close now." Rafe nodded, his hand tightening on the controls. "Let's finish what we started." The moon was silent, its surface untouched by life but scarred by time. Rafe guided the stealth courier into a tight descent pattern, eyes fixed on the navigation grid as the automated beacon began to pulse on the screen. "That's it," Elira said from beside him, her fingers brushing the controls like a pianist recalling a forgotten melody. Coordinates match the original implantation site. The Ensemble core is underground. "How far down?" 5 kilometers. There's a vertical shaft cloaked in old Zalari interference fields. We'll need to land and descend manually. Rafe didn't like it. The war had taught him to be wary of ancient tech buried beneath barren worlds. But the urgency in Elira's voice cut through doubt like a blade. They touched down on the rim of a crater, the landing struts hissing against dust that hadn't been disturbed in millennia. The landscape stretched out before them, bleak and motionless, yet somehow expectant. Rafe checked his rifle. "I assume there's more to this core than a fancy transmitter?" Elira nodded. "It's more than hardware. It's memory. Knowledge encoded in quantum strata. Not just data, experience. Zalari, human, everything the war tried to erase." He glanced at her, catching the edge of vulnerability in her expression. "That's what you are, isn't it? A repository of everything they couldn't control." "Yes. And that's why they want me dead." They descended through the shaft, ancient tech still responsive to Elira's genetic presence. Each level they passed revealed more of the buried structure, black walls laced with bioluminescent veins, humming softly as though breathing. It didn't feel abandoned, it felt dormant. The final chamber opened like a blooming flower. At its center hovered a sphere of shifting light, surrounded by suspended crystal interfaces. Elira stepped forward, and the entire room came alive. Glyphs bloomed in midair, forming cascading streams of language, image, sound. Rafe turned in awe as he saw flashes of history, human cities, Zalari temples, battlefields swallowed in fire, and faces. So many faces. Some familiar, others lost to time. "They stored everything," Lyra whispered. "Every war. Every truth. Even the lies." Rafe's mind reeled as he saw himself, young, in a lab, laughing with people he no longer remembered. Lyra stood in a tube behind glass, smaller, childlike, watching with unblinking eyes. Then the footage skipped. Screaming. Flames. And her name, spoken by someone he could almost remember, his own voice, desperate. "You sealed it away," Elira said softly. "You knew what it meant. What I meant." He took a step back. "Why did I forget?" "They made you forget. Because you changed your mind." Rafe's chest ached. "Changed it about what?" "About the war. About fighting it. You saw what I would become. What we could all become. And it terrified them." He sank to his knees. The truth was heavier than a battlefield, sharper than any weapon. He hadn't just been part of the project. He had ended it. Chosen war over peace. And in doing so, betrayed the thing he helped create. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You can still make it right." The chamber's light shifted suddenly, and warning pulses echoed through the walls. A hologram of the Argus appeared, adrift, battle-worn. Another ship emerged behind it, sleeker, darker. "That's not a warship," Rafe muttered. "It's a color." Elira's tone hardened. "They've sent the silence vessel. It'll sterilize the site. Nothing survives those. Then we don't have time." The core glowed brighter, resonating with Elira's presence. She stepped into the center ring, and the structure responded, panels aligning, beams of energy locking into her body. She screamed but did not move. What's happening? Rafe shouted, rushing forward. I'm sinking, she gritted through clenched teeth. Becoming the interface. You said it was a transmitter. It's also a key. And a door. Someone has to hold it open. The realization struck him like a bullet. You mean you're staying? I was designed to be the bridge, Rafe. Between species. Between past and future. The only way this works is if I become part of it. He grabbed her shoulders. There has to be another way. There isn't. She smiled, and for the first time, it felt purely human. You helped build me. Let me do what I was meant for. The core pulse. A wave of energy surged through the chamber, blowing back his hair. He stumbled away as she rose, no longer standing but suspended, light pouring from her eyes and chest. Her voice echoed through the room and through his mind. You're not the man who abandoned me. Not anymore. The ground trembled. Above, the color's energy signature intensified. Rafe ran to the controls, hands flying across the Zalari interface as he triggered the core's final sequence. Outside, across the moon's surface, buried towers erupted skyward, releasing a cascade of signal bursts, coded waves spreading through fold space like ripples. The ensemble had awakened. Back in the chamber, Elira's body was dissolving into light, each fragment absorbed into the data stream. She was becoming the message. Rafe stood at the threshold, watching the last of her vanish. Her final words echoed not in sound, but in thought. Show them. All of it. Then she was gone. The moon fell silent once more. Back on the ship, systems came alive. The core's interface extended its reach, infiltrating communication hubs across star sectors. Civilizations, Zalari, human, hybrid, received visions, memories, and truths long buried. Secrets of war, of peace, of betrayal. The effect was immediate. Command fleets stood down. Resistance cells began coordinating. Enemies paused and listened. Truth had always been feared because it demanded change. Rafe sat alone in the cockpit, watching the world reshape itself. He had no illusions that peace would come easily. But now it had a chance. He whispered her name once, not as a soldier, but as a father. Then he set course for Earth, not to fight, but to face what he had been and what he could become. Behind him, the moon shone quietly, no longer a tomb, but a beacon.